Hello everyone. Today we continue the emotional journey of Dieuhan, a single mother, a strong woman, yet one who has always carried a deep longing to uncover the truth about her origins. After many years living under the care of her adoptive mother, Mrs. Tom, a gentle but quiet woman, Dieuhan finally learned the truth. She was not Mrs. Tom's biological daughter. She had been adopted as an infant, found wrapped in a blanket, lying in a wicker basket left at the doorstep. That very night, Dieuhan quietly packed her belongings. Just a few essential items, all carefully placed into the same worn-out wicker bag she had used since childhood. But the most important thing she carried with her were an old photograph of her father and a faded note with an address given to her by Mrs. Tam. She knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. The city was unfamiliar, vast and overwhelming, but it also held something she had yearned for her whole life: the answers. The next morning, Han carried her child along the dusty village road. The wind wasn't strong enough to dry the sweat-soaked back of the young mother. Tom clung to her neck, his head resting on her shoulder, cheeks flushed red from the heat. As they passed the edge of the village, Han glanced over at Men's small convenience store. Coincidentally, Ms. Bean was also sitting there that morning. The moment they saw Han walking by, drenched in sweat, carrying bags, and holding her child, the two women immediately called out to her. "Han, where are you off to in such a hurry, dear?" Han didn't hide anything. She stopped and told them everything. After hearing the story, Ms. Bean suddenly stood up and went into the store. She came back with a small bag of snacks. "I don't have much, but take this for the road. Something for you and the baby to nibble on," she said gently, placing the bag in Han's hands, her eyes full of warmth. Men wasn't one to be left out either. She opened the cooler, took out 2 small cartons of milk, and slipped them into Han's woven bag. "These are for Tom," she said. "The little one's going to need something familiar in the big city." Han was flustered, her face turning red. She lowered her head and thanked them over and over. "Thank you so much, Ms. Bin. Thank you, Chi-men. I'll never forget this." Leaving the small roadside shop, where she had just received heartfelt kindness from Chi-men and Ms. Bin, Han continued her journey under the scorching midday sun. Tom lay asleep in her arms, beads of sweat glistening on his forehead. After walking a bit further, Han spotted a row of shady trees by the roadside and decided to stop and rest. Suddenly, the distant hum of a motorbike engine grew louder. A familiar motorcycle pulled up near where the mother and child were resting. The rider was none other than Dan. After hearing about Han's situation, Don hadn't hesitated for a moment. "Come on, I'll take you both to the bus station," he said. Gratefully, Han thanked Don, then climbed onto the motorbike with Tom in her arms. The 3 of them headed to the station together. Unfortunately, the last bus had just left. Thinking quickly, Don rushed to take them to the main road to flag down another bus. Luckily, just then, a long-distance coach passed by. Han gave Don a deep bow of gratitude before boarding the bus with Tom in her arms, continuing her journey forward. Taking her first steps into the city, a place completely unfamiliar, Han carried with her a fragile hope of finding traces of the parents she had never met. Her tired eyes scanned every street and alley as she walked through narrow lanes, asking strangers for directions. As she approached a small bridge leading into a suburban village, Han came across a young man sitting under a tree, beside an old motorbike. He looked rough, dusty, likely an informal motorbike taxi driver. She approached and asked him about the address where her parents used to live. The man, whose name was Jiang, replied, "That place is really far. I can take you there, but you'll have to pay for the ride." Without much thought, Han agreed and got on the motorbike, hoping to reach the riverside area where her parents had once lived. But the road seemed endlessly long. The motorbike kept going and going, yet the destination was nowhere in sight. After a long ride without any clear end, Han began to feel uneasy and asked Jiang to stop. At that point, Jiang demanded an outrageous fare. Startled, Han pleaded, saying she only had 200,000 Vietnamese dong left. But Jiang refused and even tried to snatch her bag of money. Fortunately, Nam, who happened to be nearby, noticed the commotion and quickly stepped in. After hearing what happened, he sternly warned Jiang to leave, or he'd call the police. Knowing he was outmatched, Jiang took the money and fled. Han, shaken but safe, thanked Nam profusely. While still catching her breath, she asked him for directions to the riverside area where her parents once lived. The sky gradually darkened, and a gentle layer of dusk settled over the rooftops. A dim street lamp cast a warm glow onto the quiet, empty street. After a long day of wandering, Han and little Tom stopped by a stone bench along the roadside, right next to a small house whose lights still shone in the surrounding silence. Tom rested his head on his mother's shoulder, his wide eyes filled with innocence despite the uncertainty around him. At that moment, the door of the house creaked open. A middle-aged woman stepped out to close the gate. Seeing the mother and child still outside so late in the evening, she approached and asked what had happened. After hearing Han's story, without a second thought, she opened the gate wide and said warmly, "Come inside. Stay the night. It's cold out here. This isn't a safe place to be." Inside the cozy home, Tom's face lit up as the woman's children invited him to play. Laughter and the sound of children filled the night air, warming Han's heart. It had been so long since she'd seen her son this happy. That night, in a small warm room, Han quickly drifted into sleep, her body exhausted after a long, trying day. For the first time in what felt like forever, she experienced a deep, peaceful slumber, a rare moment of calm in the midst of her uncertain journey. The next morning, before the first light of dawn could lift the veil of mist, Han was already carrying little Tom along a narrow path leading toward the riverbank. As she walked slowly, she suddenly froze in her tracks. Ahead of her, two suspicious-looking men seemed to be harassing a young woman who was struggling to get away. Without thinking, Han held Tom tightly and ran toward a small nearby house where a middle-aged man was watering his plants. She cried out for help. Fortunately, the man reacted immediately. He rushed out, shouting loudly, which startled the two thugs and caused them to flee. The young woman, though trembling, was safe. Both women couldn't stop thanking the man for stepping in at just the right moment. Knowing those two men might return, Han and the young woman quickly decided to leave the area. After running some distance, Han began to breathe heavily from exhaustion, Tom weighing heavily in her arms. The girl stopped to catch her breath with Han and gently introduced herself. Her name was Dieuhan. When she learned that Han was searching for her biological parents and had no place to stay, Dieuhan offered, "My house is nearby. If you don't mind, you can rest there for a night." Han hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She followed Dieuhan down a small winding path until they arrived at a modest yet cozy home. That evening, under the soft glow of a warm yellow light, the two women shared stories of their lives, of loss, longing, and dreams not yet fulfilled. They discovered a strange bond between them. Both had known the pain of loneliness and the struggle of facing hardships alone. Their friendship, born from a moment of rescue, slowly began to deepen. For the first time in a long while, Han felt at peace. A night without fear or worry, only gentle laughter and the quiet comfort of human kindness in an unfamiliar land. The next morning, before sunlight could filter through the cracks in the window, Han was already awake. In the small room, little Tom and Dieuhan were still sound asleep. Gently, she got out of bed, carefully pulled the blanket up to cover Tom, and tiptoed down to the kitchen. With quiet determination weighing on her heart, Han began preparing breakfast with whatever was available. Today, she had made up her mind. She must find a clue about her birth parents, the ones she had longed to meet her entire life. A short while later, Dieuhan woke up and came into the kitchen with a sleepy smile, but her smile faded as she hesitated. "Dieuhan, I'm so sorry. I have to meet with the garden owner today. I can't go with you and Tom." Han smiled and gently shook her head. "I understand. You have your own responsibilities. We'll be fine." They shared a warm, heartfelt breakfast together. After the meal, Dieuhan rushed off to her work in the garden, while Han stayed behind to tidy up the house, a small way of showing gratitude for Dieuhan's hospitality. Once everything was in order, she picked up Tom and resumed her journey. In her hand was the old slip of paper bearing her parents' former address. As she carefully navigated the streets, matching names and numbers, Han accidentally bumped into a middle-aged man. He stumbled and turned around with an annoyed shout, his face filled with irritation. Before Han could say anything, a woman emerged from the house nearby and scolded him loudly. "Ong Chin, it was just a little accident. Why are you yelling like that?" She turned to Han and softened her tone. "You and your little one must be exhausted. Come inside and have a glass of water to refresh yourselves." Han bowed in thanks and stepped into the small home of Mr. and Mrs. Chin. Once they were all settled, she took an old photo of her father as a young man from her bag and showed it to the elderly woman. Mrs. Chin studied it for a long time. Then her expression shifted. "Wait here a moment. Let me call my husband. He'll know more than I do." Moments later, Mr. Chin returned. Though still slightly grumpy, his face began to soften when he saw the photo. He looked closely, then asked in a low voice, "Can you show me both your hands?" Han hesitated but complied. He examined them carefully, his eyes widening with disbelief. "It's you. You're Tien, Hung's daughter." Han's heart skipped a beat. Tien, her childhood name, one she hadn't heard in years. Choking with emotion, she asked, "Do you know where my parents are now?" Mr. Chin sat down, his voice turning somber. He explained that when Han was just a child, her parents had to leave their hometown to seek work in the South. They had returned to look for her, but circumstances at the time were chaotic, and they lost track of each other. Her parents were still living in the South, but were expected to return for a visit soon. Mrs. Chin gently added, "Why don't you and your son stay here for a few days? Who knows, maybe they'll come back soon. You'll feel safer with family nearby." Overwhelmed with emotion, Hun bowed deeply in gratitude. However, she asked to return to Uyen's house, where she could better take care of Tom and avoid causing inconvenience. Before leaving, she held Mr. Chin's hand tightly, her eyes shining with hope, a light she hadn't felt in years, after so many days lost in uncertainty. She had just discovered an important piece of information, the first clue about her biological parents, and it had lit a spark in her, a small flame of hope, a deep desire to find her roots. Tom was her everything, the reason she kept going, the reason she didn't collapse under the weight of these uncertain days. The road ahead might still be long, but Han believed that as long as she held on to hope, as long as Tom was by her side, there was nothing she couldn't overcome.
Hân bế tôm trong tay, từng bước chậm chậm đi về phía nhà của Uyên. Cô vừa biết được một thông tin quan trọng, một manh mối đầu tiên về cha mẹ ruột của mình, và nó làm trái tim cô như bừng lên. Một tia sáng, một ngọn lửa nhỏ của hy vọng, của khao khát được tìm về cội nguồn. Cả chặng đường từ quê lên thành phố, đối với một cô gái chưa từng sống nơi phố thị như Hân, là một cuộc hành trình đầy gian nan. Cô đã từng thấy mình nhỏ bé giữa biển người, nhưng rồi, trong những ngày tưởng chừng cô đơn nhất, cô vẫn cảm nhận được điều gì đó rất đặc biệt, một chút tình cảm, một chút tử thế mà những người xa lạ dành cho cô. Một sự yên bình, nhỏ bé, len vào trong lòng Hân. Cô biết mình không còn cô đơn nữa. Tôm là tất cả lý do để cô bước tiếp, để không gục ngã giữa những ngày tháng bấp bênh này. Có thể hành trình phía trước vẫn còn rất dài, nhưng Hân tin miễn là cô còn niềm tin thì còn Tôm ở bên cạnh thì không gì là không thể vượt qua.